Welcome to Houston House at South by Southwest. I'm Natalie Harms, editor of Innovation Map. North America's largest ClimateTech incubator, Greentown Labs, is partnering with the City of Houston and the leading energy organizations headquartered here to broaden impact and expedite the global energy transition. I sat down for a virtual chat with Greentown Labs CEO Emily Reichert to dig into how Greentown Labs is leveraging Houston's robust energy ecosystem to power the ClimateTech revolution. Hi, Emily. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's so good to catch up with you.
My pleasure.
So tell us a little bit about Greentown Labs. I know based in the Boston area, but coming soon to Houston, already in Houston, but tell me a little bit about what you do.
Be happy to. Well, Greentown Labs is the largest climate tech incubator in North America. And we were founded by entrepreneurs almost 10 years ago. And they were looking for a common place to build prototypes after graduating from a local university. And they were all working in the area that at that time we called clean tech. So today we are an organization that really supports about 120 companies, and that's across 2 geographical locations. Our campus in Boston is 100,000 square feet. That spans 3 buildings, and there we have about 100 companies who are working on building these climate tech companies. And when I say climate tech, I really mean all of the different areas that we are going to need in order to decarbonize our economy, broadly defined. So we have companies at Greentown Labs working in everything from the electricity sector to agriculture to manufacturing, buildings, transportation, and then increasingly, I think of interest and certainly to the folks in our southernmost community there in Texas, resilience, I think is a very important part of the overall set of companies and areas that we should be working in to think about how we move forward in addressing climate change. So at Greentown, we have currently supported over time about 320 companies. And those companies have now raised $1.2 billion in funding. They have also created more than 6,500 jobs. And once they leave Greentown Labs, they survive and thrive with a success rate of about 88%. So we're quite proud of that. Just a couple months ago now, well, almost a year, back in June, we announced that we would be expanding from our Boston footprint into Houston, Texas. And our reason for doing that was really that Houston is the energy capital of the world and needs to be the energy transition capital of the world. And we feel like we can be a bit of the catalyst in helping with that process. And so we made the announcement in partnership with the mayor, Sylvester Turner, who's been a wonderful supporter and partner, and have been working on it ever since. And I'd say we are getting close to the point at which we will be opening a new facility later this spring. But it's just been really an incredible journey of Greentown Labs growth over 10 years, but also just seeing how far and fast the startups that we support have gone. So really excited to be speaking with you today and happy to answer any additional questions about Greentown or anything else.
Speaking of growth, of course, the expansion into Houston is a huge point of growth for Greentown, but it's also a huge opportunity for Houston. For you, what was the moment where you really recognized this need for Greentown to be in Houston, and kind of talk me through the process of being able to realize and actualize a Houston launch?
I'd love to, and it's a story that actually begins in a bar in Edo, in Houston.
As most do.
Yes. Maybe backing up a bit before that. So Greentown expanded, basically doubled in size in the Boston area in 2017. And so we were growing very quickly, maybe doubling in size about every 15 months. And we finally had that expansion, full under our belts in 2019. And at that point, I had a board member who was based in Houston, was working on a startup there. And he had been prodding me for some years, as had some of our partners who are based in Houston, to consider a Houston expansion. And I always said, we don't really have time to think about that right now. We're expanding in Boston. And then we finally got to the point where we could think about it. And so I actually attended Sarah Week in 2019. And during that week, I met with a lot of partners, potential partners, and folks from the city who were interested in Greentown expanding to Houston. But I'd say the thing that really changed my mind in terms of how to think about this was in an evening spent at a bar in Edo, at which entrepreneurs showed up with a few days' notice, and there were probably 20 companies there, and they were in, so maybe 100 or so entrepreneurs involved in these companies. And these folks were telling me things like, what Houston really needs is a community for startups working in this area. And we're a mission-based organization. Our mission is to support these climate tech entrepreneurs and provide them with the community resources and space that they need to thrive. And so when a startup says to me, we need a community, that's kind of like the magic signal. And so from that point on, it was figuring out how to tee this up and convince our board. We had a delegation from the Greater Houston Partnership come up and learn more about Greentown Labs. The mayor sent a letter that said, hey, Greentown Labs, you should come and expand to Houston. And after that, it was a bit off to the races. But to me, the magical moment was really when we heard from startups needing a community. And that need was really what brought us to Houston.
So now where we're at today is you're working on the physical space, have launched in Houston. You have announced over a dozen startups to be a part of this inaugural group in Houston. And you also have corporate partners, the likes of Chevron, Shell, the list goes on and on and on. So where are you at today, and what is 2021 really about for this kind of first year of Greentown in Houston?
So we are actually at the point where we have about 20 young companies. Wow. Who are wanting to join Greentown Houston. And interestingly, they're not just coming from Houston. Mm-hmm. We have companies as far away as California who are interested in being part of this community, as well as from Dallas and Austin. So really just feel like we're creating something that was in need for a while. And, it's exciting to be able to finally realize that in a physical space opening later this spring. So where are we? Well, there's a lot of different ways to answer that. Fundamentally, we provide space for companies to build their products and processes and be part of a community doing that. And so in terms of the building, we're about 2 months out from finishing our construction project, which is really a retrofit of an older industrial building that just kind of had the perfect footprint for what we needed to get started in Houston. So that's later this spring. In terms of startups, I'm already amazed at how much and how well we've been able to make connections amongst this startup community that maybe ran into each other every once in a while, but for the most part tended to be isolated and in little pockets where they might be subletting space together in Houston or in other places. And so we're already really starting to build that community, and we're connecting it to our Boston community, which is really exciting to me. And part of the overall thinking about Greentown Houston is, how do we bring the best and brightest, whether it's brain power, passion, energy, no pun intended, to the climate fight. We're going to need people in all of these places to be working together and collaborating. So building that bridge is an important part of what we're doing. And then, corporate partners, we're trying to finish our fundraising. So we have I believe about $1.5 million left of our $10 million funding that we are raising in order to build this building and get Greentown off to a good financial start there in Houston for the first 3 years. So almost finished up with that.
And you mentioned working with the city, from Mayor Turner writing you a letter to now kind of as you roll out. So and it's mutually beneficial, right? Because the city does have its climate action plan, and Greentown Labs coming into Houston is definitely going to play a role in that. So for you, what's it like to work so closely with the city as you really kind of create your space here in Houston?
Well, I can't say enough good things about the experience of working with the city of Houston. And I think Mayor Sylvester Turner is a visionary and someone who really sees where the city can go and should go, frankly, as it moves into the future in a world where where climate change is just an everyday part of everyone's lives, and finding a role that you can individually play to do your part becomes more and more a part of everyone's reality is really exciting. That while we were in the process of coming to Houston, the city released its first ever climate action plan. That was Earth Day, April of 2020. And the climate action plan for Houston has a net zero greenhouse gas emissions goal for 2050, which is like commensurate with places like Boston and other cities that you would think of in other parts of the country. And it's also commensurate with other countries that have announced these goals. Korea and Japan have both announced net zero 2050 goals as well. So Houston is right up there with all these other places in terms of the science that really lays out the foundation and the pathway for how we get there. And I think as well, the Houston process was very much one of engaging stakeholders. And I think that is an important thing to think about as well. This isn't a plan or a program that just came out of an office and it's going to lay in the dust. It's a very active group of stakeholders who are engaged in figuring out how do you actually move this thing forward. Sure, a plan is nice, but what's the action? And I know that even within the Greentown Labs Houston Advisory Board, this is an area of active discussion and collaboration. So we look forward to more of that over time, to helping to facilitate the implementation of the plan, most likely through technologies that are developed out of Greentown Labs, or being able to provide the connections to stakeholders who have this technology already in the market. And so I think that we can help on that front, but also I think we can help with the conversation as well. Greentown is a convener of sorts. We bring people together who are all working on this area and allow them to connect with one another. And those connections are often what facilitate partnerships and progress. So say we're excited by Houston's plan and excited to be a part of implementing it in whatever way we can best support.
Absolutely. And speaking of conversations, I think what Texas saw in February with the winter storm, it sparked a lot of conversations, and the conversations will only continue to grow. So, from Greentown's perspective, what are those conversations? What does it look like? And what are we taking from, what happened into the future, into the energy transition? What are you seeing?
Well, I think first and foremost, in my heart and thoughts are with all of those that we lost during this storm and the resulting power outages. And I know there are still a number of individuals in the Houston area and well beyond that I'm not aware of that still don't have access to water, at least. And so this is still an ongoing situation. And so I just wanted to recognize that for the Houston staff that we have there on the ground, it was a tough week, certainly, to not have power and light, but power, light, and heat, I should say. But there are a lot of people that, lost loved ones. And so this is a very real people-centric crisis that is in many ways of human making. And so I think that we have to accept responsibility for that and think about how we make systems more resilient going forward. I am not one who wants to necessarily point fingers and say, well, these folks should have regulated this, or we should have had these systems in place. Let's look at what happened, understand what went wrong, and fix it. And that's really what we need to do. There will be technology solutions, there will be policy solutions. There will most certainly be, things revealed that we will know that we will not want to do those again in the future. But all in all, I just think that it has to make all of us think about, how do we best handle this type of thing in the future? It's going to be more and more frequent. We're going to have these disasters, and Houston in particular is no stranger to disasters. The region suffers from hurricanes and rainstorms, and so this is something that we have to think about, how we go forward and build resilience in our systems, in people, in infrastructure, and I think that's an important part of how we address climate change.
So we've spoken a lot about the different parties that Greentown convenes and brings together for this conversation. So for those parties, whether it be corporates or startups, whoever, how can they get involved, especially here in Houston, with Greentown Labs?
Oh, so many ways to get involved with Greentown Labs, especially once we have a building. That'll make everything easier. For the time being, I would just direct everyone to the website, which is greentownlabs.com. And then we have a specific page for Houston, and we have a mailing list that would allow you to get updates on events and programming and things that we're doing. Certainly the pandemic has not stopped us from hosting events and programming. And in fact, I think we will be in a better shape to continue to connect communities in Boston and Houston and perhaps eventually elsewhere because of what's happened over the last year and how it's forced us to adapt and learn. So how can you get involved? I'd say that the first and foremost thing that everyone can do is learn about personally how you can be engaged in addressing climate change, whether it be through your job, whether it be through learning about the climate action plan that Houston has, whether it be learning about companies at Greentown Labs or renewable energy companies. Houston is kind of a renewable energy capital that no one knows about, in addition to being the energy capital. And so just learning and then sharing that information, I think, kind of starts to build the fabric and the ecosystem that we're going to need to move Houston forward with the energy transition. And we see Greentown as being a bit of a catalyst for that, a bit of a convener for that, but it's really going to take everyone taking that extra step to learn and get involved for it to really all work.
Absolutely. It's a great call to action for every single person watching this right now. So I really appreciate you taking the time to talk about this, Emily, and I'm excited to see Greentown Labs really establish itself in Houston this year and beyond.
Me too. I'm very excited to get those doors open.